Welcome to the Best Little Town Podcast, your go-to source for everything happening in the town of Bedford's local government. Whether it's new initiatives or important decisions shaping our town's future, you'll hear it right here. This podcast is dedicated to keeping our residents informed and engaged.
Hello, this is Bart Warner, Town Manager of Bedford, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this episode of the Best Little Town Podcast. Speaking to you Wednesday morning, October 9th, the day after our regular council meeting. And of course, the purpose of this is to provide another source of information about the actions taken by council and to provide a little bit of background information that may or may not have been obvious from either attending in person or watching online or watching the recording of the meeting. And with that, I'm going to get right into last night's action. Of course, we begin the meeting with a set agenda, and certain things take place sequentially, beginning with my report to council. And last night I mentioned, and will remind everyone listening, that the town's annual fall cleanup week is underway. This is a semi-annual event that involves primarily the pickup of bulk goods at the curbside for customers who pay the refuse collection fee. Also, we've had a few concerns about brush pickup and the fact that looks like we may have gotten behind schedule on that a little bit. I will tell you that in conjunction with Cleanup Week, Public Works staff is also taking this opportunity to catch up on brush collection town-wide. So if you are a paying customer of the solid waste refuse collection fee, this will be a good time to get, frankly, everything out to the curb for pickup. If you have any specific questions about the event itself or this service, please reach out to the Public Works Department directly. Their telephone number is 540-587-6081. The other thing I mentioned last night, and we'll talk to folks about, is the town is pleased to host special events throughout the boundaries of town and throughout the year, and particularly in town-owned facilities such as our parks. If you are interested in hosting a special event, and particularly if you want to make a reservation or have a specific time allotted for facilities such as Liberty Lake Park, we ask that you coordinate those to the town administration office. You can reach us directly by phone at 540-587-6001. Also be advised, there have been some recent changes in policy and process related to special events. So we're aware that there are folks who've had some things that are kind of annual or ongoing, and they have been in the past and are planning to continue. We would just ask that you reach out to us to confirm your dates and the availability of facilities on that, because we've had a couple of hiccups recently with some miscommunication on our end, and we want to make sure that we don't create burdens or obstacles to people who want to do things, and we want to make sure we make our facilities available on an equitable basis. Speaking of special events, the Liberty High School Homecoming Parade takes place this afternoon, Wednesday, beginning at 5:30 p.m. This will be a modified rolling procession beginning at College Street and continuing through North Bridge Street and East Main Street. While there will be essentially a police escort, this will be a moving procession, so we're trying to minimize the closure of streets and the impact on traffic, particularly in what's becoming the rush hour here in our growing community. On an administrative note, town offices will be closed on Monday, October 14th, in observance of a state-recognized holiday. I also reported last night with great regret that Police Chief Ronnie Lewis has submitted his resignation from that position effective January 3rd, 2025. I want to say at this point, we really appreciate Ronnie's service in the position. We wish him well in the future. Personally, I've greatly enjoyed working with him, and I think he's done a wonderful job. The final item on my report last night was to welcome a new recording secretary. That's the person who is responsible for getting the minutes down and publishing those to provide a written record and document of our meetings. Ms. Shawna Bogus has joined us in that position. Last night was her first night in that role, and she did a wonderful job. Moving into the agenda, we had appearances before council. That is the part of our agenda in which folks can sign up to speak to council on any topic of their choosing. although we do typically impose a time limit of 3 minutes for those presentations. Last night we had 2 such speakers. The first was Mr. Brian Bradley of 3962 Forest Road, who was mentioning some traffic concerns in the area of the curve on 221. As you're leaving town heading eastward towards Forest, that's the kind of big curve that goes around and crosses the Big Otter River, which is the new current town limits line. Mr. Bradley lives in that curve, and he was just commenting on the fact that there are some challenges for the residents there and also for motorists in general with the geometry of that whole area. He noted that yesterday morning a truck came around the curve and he actually had to back up into his driveway quickly to avoid an unfortunate situation for all involved. Also last night, Mr. Ethan Strickler of 2326 Robertson Road came before council to offer prayer and a message regarding the relationship of vexation to wisdom. We then moved into comments from individual council members. Councilman Todd Foreman noted that he appreciated the prayer offered by Mr. Strickler. He extended his thanks to attendees at the meeting who were there in person. He also noted that due to an unexpected death at his place of work, he will have to miss council meetings as a result of work travel. And that brought up an interesting, well, maybe not interesting, but relevant point about state law and meetings regarding attendance. The town does make use of the ability to let council members attend via Zoom and similar platforms. Again, give a shout out to our partners with Media Squatch for making that possible. But there is also a state law related to that. And what's interesting about the law is that once you're elected to council, there really are no attendance requirements per se. But if you want to attend virtually, there is a law that says you can only do so up to 20% of the time. 25% of the time, which means if council met 20 times a year, that an individual council member would be limited to 5 times in which they could participate virtually. Again, crediting Mr. Foreman for wanting to fulfill his duties as a councilman, it's a little bit odd that the law says that he can only make use of the virtual option 5 times, but it doesn't require him to be physically present. I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent here because I think there's an educational opportunity, and that relates to the way that local government business is done in Virginia, and not many people are aware of this. The relationship of towns to the state government is that towns in Virginia, and frankly most local governments, can only do the things that the General Assembly specifically says that they can do. So oftentimes we hear frustration expressed, and it's certainly valid, about the inability of the town and the town's officials to do certain things or to respond to certain things in an efficient manner. Oftentimes we have to provide the answer, which frankly we don't like to provide, that we're not able to do that according to state law. So I mention that as an aside and as an educational opportunity. This references Dillon's rule. If you're a government nerd like me and you want to do more research about it, Google that and it'll tell you a little bit more about that situation. Essentially, it says that local governments are creatures of the state, and it defines the relationship. Again, I will tell you, in Virginia, we can only do those things that the state government specifically says we can do. It's not like that everywhere. Our neighbors in North Carolina have the same rule, but they apply it differently. Their interpretation is local governments can do anything their citizens demand unless it is specifically prohibited. I know that's a really nerdy point of view, and it might not make a lot of sense, but hopefully it explains some of the way things happen in your local government. With that, I'm going to hop back into the agenda momentarily and hop back into council comments. Councilman Bruce Johansson also noted that he appreciated the prayer. He expressed his disappointment in the fact that we're losing Chief Lewis, and also acknowledged his opinion that Ronnie has done a great job. Vice Mayor C.G. Stanley likewise noted that he appreciated the prayer. He extended congratulations to Ann Cantrell and her staff on the audit report, again, this is kind of down in the weeds, but we do bring in independent auditors on an annual basis to assess what we're doing and to tell us if we're doing anything wrong or if there are improvements to be made. One of the things they've talked about in terms of improvements for years is separation of duties. And that's basically the idea that no one person really ought to have a great deal of control or authority to handle or deal with public funds. That's been a challenge for us because we are a relatively small organization compared to some others, but Ann and her staff have done a good job of spreading that work around, and we have checks and balances built in more. And that's a comment that's been present in our audit for several years until now. And the folks at Brown Edwards made a note that the town is making a good effort to be transparent and responsible in its handling of funds, and that was the reference behind CG's comment. Vice Mayor Stanley also noted that he was honored to attend the event on September 28th, dedicating Beulah Payne Memorial Park. He complimented the organizers of that event, including Councilman Bob Carson. On a personal note of advice that Vice Mayor Stanley offered, he mentioned the tragic flooding event in North Carolina recently and gave the example of some friends of his who were caught in that event who lived in Nashville, Tennessee, but happened to be in the Asheville, North Carolina area. And in getting back home, they had to take a roundabout way. Of course, the dreadful impacts of Helene and the flooding there have caused long-term disruption for most of the road network in that general area of the country. These folks had to go down to Atlanta to go back up to Nashville to get home. CG encouraged everyone to always pack an emergency kit with traveling and to include in that kit a flashlight and an atlas. And that's just something that maybe a lot of us don't even own anymore. Paper maps were a thing that were widely available, but in the event that you don't have access to internet service or reliable cell service and you need to find where you're going, it's good to have those old school resources available. And we appreciate Mr. Stanley's recommendation there. Councilman Stacey Haley also thanked Mr. Strickler for praying. He thanked the attendees at the meeting, and he said he was also sorry to hear about Chief Lewis's departure. He noted that the chief had some great ideas, and he personally wishes him well in his future endeavors. Councilman Bob Carson likewise thanked Mr. Strickler for his prayer. He asked that we remember the displaced persons as a result of Hurricane Helene, and also remember those folks in the path of Milton, which that hurricane looks like it's making landfall possibly as we speak down in Florida. Bob shared his observation in the recent situation, though, of seeing people who had lost everything themselves who were still banding together to help others, and he found inspiration in that, and we appreciate him mentioning that. Mr. Carson also thanked people for their support of the September 28th park dedication, and he recognized the role of Public Works especially. Mr. Carson shared his opinion regarding Chief Lewis's departure, that we did probably as a community did not support him enough, and he was a very good man who has done well. Councilman Darrell Updike also noted his thanks for the prayer that was offered. He noted he attended the funeral of Private First Class Kennedy on September 28th. Mr. Morris Kennedy was the first casualty from Bedford County in World War II. The gentleman gave his life in service on Guadalcanal and was interred there until fairly recently, when his remains were identified through DNA and returned to Bedford County for proper burial in the local cemetery. Councilman Updike also noted the fact that we had a tornado in our vicinity back on September 27th and expressed his gratitude that the tornado damage there was not worse than it could have been. He also appreciated the efforts of the electric department in responding to various outages with regard to that weather event and their work in recovery and assisting people afterwards. Mayor Tim Black concluded the council comments by noting that there are guests in town currently from France in conjunction with the program administered by the Bedford International Alliance, and he thanked Public Works for installing the French flags on light poles downtown. If you notice that, we put those out on the polls, and our colleagues in the department are pretty timely in doing that, in conjunction with our relationship to historical and current events in France. Around the commemoration of D-Day, you'll see them on the polls. And also when we're welcoming people there who, again, are visiting our community based on that tight historical connection, we put those out so they can see that we value that relationship and the ongoing interactions. Mayor Black shared his disappointment in the resignation of Chief Lewis. Again, said he appreciated the work and extended his best wishes to Ronnie as he moves forward. Mayor Black asked that we continue to recognize the needs of our neighbors in Tennessee and Southwest Virginia in recovery efforts. He also gave some good advice to beware of scammers when making donations to relief. Unfortunately, following up on Mr. Carson's comments of seeing the great parts of people in response to events, it also brings out the lesser elements sometimes that tend to take advantage of that. So be aware of who you're giving money to and providing that kind of support. Keep up that effort, but please be aware that there are some bad elements out there. And with that concluded, we moved on to the consent agenda, which involved appointments of members to 3 different boards: the Redevelopment and Housing Authority, the Economic Development Authority, and the Planning Commission. Mr. Jim Messier is currently serving on the Redevelopment and Housing Authority and expressed a willingness in being reappointed. The position was appropriately advertised. No other people stepped forward. And consequently, council voted unanimously to reappoint Mr. Messier to serve on a 3-year term on the Redevelopment and Housing Authority, with the next term to expire October 13th, 2028. Lynn Scott and David Sensenig likewise are currently serving on the Economic Development Authority and expressed a willingness to continue serving on the EDA. We did post the advertisement and no other people responded. So in appreciation of their willingness to serve, council reappointed both Ms. Scott and Mr. Sensenig to another term on the EDA, their term set to expire November 30th, 2028. We also had a vacancy on the Planning Commission, which is very significant related to a recent action taken by that group. That vacancy was created due to a member stepping down before the end of their term. Mr. Philip Thompson expressed an interest in being appointed. Again, that vacancy was advertised, and Philip was the only person who really responded. Recognizing Mr. Thompson's professional qualifications, he currently serves as the Director of Planning for Roanoke County, even though he's a resident of the town. Council unanimously appointed him to serve the remainder of the vacant term on the Planning Commission, which is set to expire March 31st, 2025. I mentioned that is significant because the Planning Commission is comprised of 7 members. That's a body that kind of vets projects regarding zoning activity, rezoning activity, subdivision approval, and the like. Recently, there is a neighborhood being proposed to be built adjacent to the existing Governor's Hill neighborhood. It's the next phase, and it's been through the process once without being approved by council. That came through again, and the Planning Commission held a public hearing and took action, but voted 3-3 on the motion to recommend approval. So consequently, that project will move forward to Town Council for consideration without a recommendation from the Planning Commission, which is a little unusual. Ideally, by appointing someone to fill that remaining vacancy, we can avoid those situations in the future. Also, for those who are interested, the Governor's Hill proposal will move forward before council at its November regular meeting. Moving into the new business portion of the meeting, last night, council had a proposal to appropriate funds for a feasibility study related to the Snowden hydroelectric plant. Again, for those of you who are not maybe familiar with the inner workings of our electric system, the town purchases a great deal of its power from other places and it's transmitted over power lines. But we also generate a reasonable amount. I say reasonable, it's on a good day with the hydro plants, about 8 to 10% probably. And we also have a solar power generating plant. The idea behind that is if we can generate our own power, obviously we don't have to buy it from other places. So that helps us in our overall costs, which we try to pass along those savings to our citizens. The hydroelectric plant on the James River at Snowden, which is right near the crossing of Route 122 and its connection to Route 501, is a facility that was erected by the then town of Bedford back 115 years ago. And it really kind of a lot of people don't know why the town is involved in the electric business. That's probably the historical reason. Back when electricity was a new thing, the town fathers at the time decided to take advantage of that by constructing a generating power plant on the James River and transmitting that power all the way to town limits. Again, that facility is about 115 years old now. We currently have generators there that are very sensitive to the level of water in the river. That's because of the way they're designed to operate. Back around 1910, the state of the art was to have generators that spun around horizontally as the water pushed them. And that's the situation that still endures. The problem, such that it is we only generate power based on the level of water within the James River itself. And sometimes if you're watching, particularly our council retreats and some of our operational discussions, we will tell council that we're not generating power at all from the hydro plant because the water is either too low or too high. When the water's too high, it's rushing, it's not really moving anything efficiently. If it's too low, the horizontally oriented turbines just can't reach it, and again, they don't spin. The other interesting thing about that is we're not really able to turn off the run-of-the-river plant the same way that some of our neighboring utilities, such as Appalachian Power, are. Where they have dams with impounds, they can control the level of water that passes through and creates energy artificially and through manipulation of their dams and other systems. Our system is not that way. When the water runs in what is about an 18-inch bandwidth at the surface level of the river, we generate power, we put it out on the grid. Another bit of background related to that is we are regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which oversees all power generating facilities such as this in all forms throughout the country. We are required to go through a relicensing process with them. That is a very extensive and very expensive process that we have been engaged in for about 5 years now. As part of that process, we have engaged the engineer, and that firm is WSP, to complete a feasibility study to look at the current operation of the hydro plant, which again I just went over in some detail, to see how we can possibly make that more efficient, including the possibility of adding additional new turbines that would be vertically oriented and we would hope operate more efficiently in low water situations. In order to do that, we need to have somebody come in and take a good look at it, and it's good to have a third-party individual do that. And that's what we've asked council to do. Essentially, this firm will look at the current operation, look at how we might be able to improve it in the future. Or on the other end, if they say that, frankly, the 115-year-old facility has some issues that would be very expensive or difficult to address, they'll give us that advice as well. Ideally, if they tell us it can be expanded, then we could include that in our FERC relicensing project, and that's why we're doing that right now. We have a proposal from WSP to do that work. The quote was for $125,000. Again, backing up to our production of power, since hydro is identified as a green source of power, we are able to get credits for that power. And that's kind of in the form of, it's kind of the way the stock market works. We generate dividends by creating green power, which we sell on the open market. Those are called renewable energy credits. We do that on a regular basis in cooperation with our partners with the American Municipal Power Organization. And through a recent activity, the town generated $272,000 of available revenue. Since that revenue was generated through the activity of the Snowden hydro plant, we felt it was appropriate to fund this expenditure through that. So council last night took action to appropriate the $272,000 of revenue that we received from the renewable energy credits and use $135,000 of that to fund the feasibility study that I just described. That $135,000 figure was based on the quote from WSP, and they also added a $10,000 level of contingency just in case. And again, sorry for providing possibly too much information for those of you who are not interested in the inner workings of the hydro industry, but council unanimously voted to approve that feasibility study and appropriate the money appropriately. The next item of business related to reimbursement from our insurance carrier of $5,900 for a claim made by the fire department for collision damage to our Utility 1 vehicle, which occurred back on September 3rd. Council approved appropriating the $5,900 payment from insurance towards the cost of repairs to that important piece of fire apparatus. The next item of new business also related to an appropriation of funds. This relates to police projects. The police are involved in a joint project with their counterparts in Bedford County with Motorola related to upgrading and installing a radio and information system that is very useful for law enforcement and first responders. The cooperative arrangement with the county resulted in $23,621 being contributed on a one-time basis from the county towards expenditures for that project. Council voted unanimously to accept that money and to utilize $16,121 of it for the public safety building improvements, specifically the improvements to Liberty Lake Park, where we intend to make use of what's been a vacant building there for police staff to alleviate overcrowding issues, and also $7,500 for purchase of body cameras and microphones. Getting back into the electric operation, I mentioned that while the town generates some of its power through its hydroelectric and solar facilities, an overwhelming portion of the power that keeps us running is purchased from other sources. One of those is a wind power generation facility in Ohio, and we are able to purchase power from them through our membership in the American Municipal Power Organization. This might be a good segue to describe the nature of AMP, as it's referred to. That's basically a cooperative group of municipal electric utilities that band together to provide benefits that maybe they couldn't obtain on their own. Again, our utility system serves a town of about 7,500 people and a larger population of probably close to 9,000 or 10,000 when you get out and include our county customers. That's not a huge amount of negotiating power in the larger market. So we joined AMP about 20 years ago, and that includes municipalities like us in Virginia, West Virginia, and Ohio. And collectively, we are able to pursue worthwhile projects. In this case, we're able to purchase wind power that's generated at a wind farm in Ohio known as Blue Creek. Again, it's not a great deal of the percentage of the electricity we generate, but since it's considered to be green energy, the town will also receive renewable energy credits by purchasing this power. Town council voted unanimously last night to approve the contract for purchase of this wind power from Blue Creek Wind Facility in Ohio through our relationship with AMP. The last item of new business related to some speed limit changes that I think most citizens will be interested in. The Public Safety Committee of Town Council, let me back up a second. Town Council does appoint certain committees that are identified in town code to dive into deeper discussions of particular events that may be relevant at any given time. Those committees are comprised of the mayor and 2 other members, and they meet on an as-needed basis. One such meeting took place recently on September 24th, and that was the Public Safety Committee meeting, as you might derive from its name. That committee is charged with taking a deep look at regulations dealing with things like traffic, civil code, and the criminal codes that the town might administer. That group met and discussed speed limit concerns in 3 specific areas, that being Longwood Avenue, Oakwood Street, and Forest Road, which is also Highway 221. in response to some specific concerns expressed by citizens along those corridors. Back on September 24th, the committee met and unanimously voted to recommend some changes to speed limits on those roads, which people should be aware of. The first is application of a 25 mile per hour speed limit for the entirety of Longwood Avenue within town limits. Those of you who are very familiar with town will recognize that Longwood Avenue runs approximately from the former middle school at Peak Street to the intersection with Oakwood Street and then on to the Food Line Shopping Center. There are different speed limits along that route. Currently, there's a stretch that's 35 miles per hour on an area that is 4 lanes wide in certain stretches of a residential area. The committee recognized that the impact of that on the residents could be negative, and they recommended removing that 35 mile per hour speed limit and applying 25 miles per hour through its entirety. So there will be a transitional period where we get the new signs up and we pass along this information, but be advised that the recommendation is for Longwood Avenue speed limit to be 25 miles per hour throughout town. The next area they looked at was Oakwood Street, which currently has a speed limit of 30 miles per hour from its intersection with Longwood Avenue, and then it goes back down to 25 miles per hour in the vicinity of Bedford Memorial Hospital. The committee also recommended reducing that speed limit from 30 miles per hour to 25 miles per hour in the interest of consistency. The next area of focus was the Highway 221 corridor. If you're heading out of town toward Forest and Lynchburg, this is the area approximately from McGee Street onto the current town limits, which are now the Big Otter River. I'm sorry, or is it the Little Otter River? I'm getting my rivers confused. Either way, on 221, it's the river. That's the new town limit. Currently, from McGee Street onward, that speed limit is 45 miles per hour. And as I mentioned, we had a citizen speak last night, and we had one speak last month about their concerns, particularly in the curve of that as you reach the town limits, and the fact that 45 miles an hour might be just a little bit too fast for everybody in terms of turning traffic. So council discussed reducing that speed limit from 45 miles per hour to 35 miles per hour. There was also some discussion of posting some signage there to improve people's awareness of the fact that there are hidden driveways within that curve and the possibility of installing a flashing speed limit sign permanently to attract attention. All of these recommendations were passed unanimously. So I would say, in very general terms, we would ask people to be aware of that. Pay attention to your speed, and if you're able, try to consciously make an effort to slow down. Even within traveling the posted speed limits, we do have a lot of pedestrian activity in town. We have a lot of things going on the sidewalks and in our business community. So again, without editorializing, I know council's intent was not to aggravate drivers, but to promote a safer environment. And we just ask for everyone's participation in doing that. And that was the last item of new business covered last night. I appreciate your time and attention. We appreciate your input. As always, we want to hear from you. If there's anything on your mind, you can contact Town Hall at 540-587-6001. You can reach out to me personally via email at bwarner@bedfordva.gov. And this concludes this episode of the Best Little Town podcast. I will note that we take our title from a slogan that is used in reference to Bedford and is posted on some of our materials and signage. And while sometimes we may see that as a boast or brag, we always see that as an aspiration of what we would like to become. And even when we come up short, we will continue to seek that standard. Thank you again for your support in that. And until next time when we share information, I hope that everyone stays safe, dry, and we would ask that you would certainly keep the folks in your prayers and concerns who are facing bad weather in other parts of the country.